welcome to this week's book club episode of Star Wars Dark Disciple by Christie Golden. If you're not familiar with this series, we take a look at this book a couple of chapters at a time, digging into the themes and happenings, really analyzing it down to the sentence. And if you would like to join this journey from the beginning, you can go ahead and check the description for a link to that. But for today, we're going to be discussing chapters 20, 21, and 22. Where this chapter picks up, Ventress is stalking around Dooku. She's gotten his attention. And she challenges him to a fight, and he kind of sneaks off, and they're preparing, and Voss encounters Grievous, and his goal is basically to get Grievous separated from Dooku so Ventress and Voss can take Dooku by themselves. This exchange is very much right out of Clone Wars, just kind of a, oh, we're gonna show up and surprise Grievous and lock him in the droid closet, effectively. And I kind of wonder just how much more effective would it have been to, kill Grievous if he could? I mean, he had him stuck in that room. He probably could have thrown some kind of grenade or something in there. Obviously, he can't because Grievous shows up in Revenge of the Sith. And so it's one of those kind of plot-locked things. And at first, when I was reading it, I was like, this is a little convenient. But then, of course, Grievous does show up later. When I read something like this, I wonder if it's, how much of it is necessity? Grievous can't die. How much of it is really in line with the character, because Voss is somebody who doesn't want to kill if he doesn't have to, at least not in an unhonorable way, even though he's playing with the dark side right now. He hasn't fully gone over to it just yet. He's more like calling on it when he wants it. But either way, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because he just takes Grievous's comlink, but all of the droids would have comlinks in their heads, so I don't think Voss is thinking through this very well. But of course we see that because Grievous shows up again later. Dooku and Ventress meet up on the balcony, and Dooku brings wine. This was a very Dooku-esque moment, because he brings her 2 glasses, and Ventress wonders if one's poisoned. Then, when she turns it down, Dooku makes a point of drinking out of her glass. Later on in this chapter, Dooku also drinks out of his own. Either it's some sort of Princess Bride thing where he's actually immune to the poison that he would have tried to give Ventress, or maybe he just knows that Ventress was never going to accept it, so he brings 2 perfectly good glasses of wine. Either way, it's a very, very Dooku-like move that I appreciated. It's something where he can show that he's in power. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if that's really all it was. I wouldn't be surprised if he had actually poisoned it either. But something where Dooku can walk into a situation where he's already being challenged on his home turf, literally, and some place where he would feel kind of at a loss, and to be like, no, I'm going to show you that I'm actually the Sith Lord in charge by bringing this wine and making you try to figure out what mind game I'm playing, when really I'm not playing one at all. I'm just letting your mind run with it. That moment only lasts so long, though, because he goes to call in Grievous, and Grievous doesn't show. Instead, Voss does. This puts Dooku back on his feet a little bit. He thought he had the ace in the hole, when it turns out Ventress is the one with the ace, and then, of course, the fight is about to begin. Dooku regains the feeling of superiority when he thinks about how Jedi take prisoners, and that's when they have to explain that's not exactly what's going on. Voss is getting a little boisterous. He's wanting to brag a little bit, and he lets it slip that Ventress has been teaching him. That's a danger, because Dooku will latch on to anything. He will find any kind of little speck of something and run with it. He's an exceptional Sith Lord in this regard. We're so used to Sith Lords in Star Wars. We've seen them, you have Maul with the crazy face, Palpatine's the big evil, Vader has the cool suit. Dooku, in a way, is the subtle Sith Lord. At times he can seem underwhelming, but Dooku's style, what makes him such a good evil Sith, is really his silver tongue, and how he can just manipulate and work the room that he's in at any given moment. I mean, the fact that he's this charismatic leader getting a humanitarian award, and not necessarily like the one that dictators get, where they just duct tape the word humanitarian on a trophy somewhere and give it to themselves. This is a group of people who really do look up to Dooku and don't understand that he's just using them, and to kind of manipulate populations of many planets that way. That's the big version of the small scale look at what his skill does. It's also just an insight into Voss again. He is so genuinely interested in Ventress that it's hard for him to just not talk her up, especially to somebody who has cast her out. But it doesn't go particularly well. They start fighting. Ventress gets a knock in the head. And that kicks us over to chapter 21, which puts us back in Voss's perspective. Voss is fearing for Ventress and turns that into rage. He's starting to use the dark side, and Dooku is using that to lure him in. Ventress wakes up now, and she's yelling to Voss, and she's trying to warn him about Dooku, and Dooku runs with that too, and starts planting the seed of doubt into Voss, that Ventress is going to betray him because she betrays everybody. And now that he knows that there's this teacher connection and more so of a connection, a deeper connection, that's something he can twist, as opposed to them just being partners that happen to have a common goal and nothing else in common, and something that, in a way, even though Ventress is so sure that Voss needed the dark side to defeat Dooku, which still remains to be seen, considering that she has tried to use the dark side several times and it hasn't worked. If they had remained just partners, then that's nothing that Dooku could have worked, right? If the fear of Ventress betraying him wouldn't be there, it would just be inevitable. It would be, oh yeah, she probably will, but she won't until this fight's over, Count. And, you don't have that to play on in a way that there's now this personal connection that would be ripping into Voss. It's at this point that Grievous shows up like a jack-in-the-box and pulls Ventress over the edge. Ventress calls to Voss and uses his first name, his whole first name of Quinlan, and that really gets Voss's or Quinn's attention. And he yells Asajj back at her, and they're having this emotional moment because now he's worried about her. And Voss once again takes that emotion and turns it towards Dooku. And he actually has the best of Dooku at this point. Like, he has Dooku on the ground. He could kill him in that moment, but now that he's reveling in the dark side, he wants the Count to fear this moment, to feel broken in this moment, and it gives Dooku the window to come after Voss and once again get the upper hand. And this is the problem with the dark side. This is the problem with being an undisciplined person using the dark side, is that when you need that rage to feed you, and you need it to the point where you can't keep your head in the moment, that's where the dark side ultimately betrays you back. If this was just some random person in the street and he was just trying to get charged up on some fear juice, that would be one thing, but he needs to be focused because he's fighting a Sith Lord. There's a cunning and a discipline that a true Sith like Dooku would have that Voss just doesn't have because he's too new to this power that feels too intoxicating for him to keep his focus while he's using it. So as I said, Dooku gets the upper hand, Voss loses his saber as it falls over the edge, and we go back to Ventress. Ventress is falling and fighting through head injury. She's had about 20 concussions at this point, fighting through the pain, and she encounters Grievous. She catches Voss's saber, so it's one of those things where what's bad for Voss ends up being good for Ventress. Grievous himself is still saberless, and so Ventress is able to kind of push him back, and it looks like she's able to get away until some droids show up. So now that's what's holding her back. We go back to Voss, and Voss is getting electrocuted and carried off. As he's getting carried off, this is the moment where Ventress is able to get away from the droids and see what's happening to Voss, but she, on her own, can't save him. There's too much going on. She's just one person. And she ultimately has to retreat, not because she's leaving Voss behind, but because her dying in that moment isn't going to help Voss in the future. But that seed of doubt is there, and now Voss is in pain and hoping and counting on Ventress, and so it's this moment of like, why did she run? Is she gonna come for me? And it's maybe not something that he would really, really feel. He's at such a broken and desperate moment that that's certainly something that occurs to him. That is exemplified by the fact that Voss, who has been staring at Ventress all night, can't look away from her, been in awe of her beauty to the point where it's pointed out several times in the chapters last week. It is just now, after being so engrossed in her physical form, that he realizes her necklace is a snake. And the snake represents betrayal, very much in the story, if not just in literature in general. So it's really going to start to get to him. Ventress escapes and swears that she's going to rescue Voss. She considers going to Obi-Wan for help, but doesn't think he'd believe her. And it's this point where we see Ventress, we get to have this moment with Ventress, and we see that she wants to do whatever she has to do to help Voss, that she's not betraying him. She simply retreated so that she can come and get him in a point where she's going to have more of an advantage. The irony is now the one person who trusted and believed in her the most is going to have to face whether or not he trusts her. And, even though it's not necessarily spelled out in these chapters, remember that there is still one thing that Ventress is keeping back from Voss. And so that's what I've been saying, is so much of their relationship outside of master and student has been built around this common goal where she's ultimately more honest with him than not, but she's been keeping this one lie from him. And that's going to play out here eventually, because this is a problem when you don't set a good foundation. Now we're going to go to chapter 22. Voss is being tortured. And I really liked the writing here. Like, not just the story, not just the characterization, but the actual writing, the actual word choice. Because first we have, he was tortured for the 10th or 1,000th time. And that in and of itself creates a certain effect. It shows you, like, oh, it's been so many times that you can't even remember how many times. But then, a little bit later, it says the 1,000th or the 10th time, and that reversal. And that reversal tells us something else. That tells us just about the passage of time. Maybe he doesn't know how many times, because the tortures have been so long or so short or so constant that he doesn't really know how many times it's happened, how many breaks he's had, how many times he's stayed tortured through being passed out. Maybe I'm reading that wrong, but that was the effect it created for me. It was not only was it so many times he couldn't keep count, but the timing of it in of itself was such that he doesn't really know what's going on. And I thought that was very well shown just in a reverse sentence, if that makes sense. As the tortures continue, Dooku really wants to know what's up between Voss and Ventress. He's trying to turn that, manipulate that. Eventually, in this chapter, he refers to Voss as his apprentice. This reminds me a lot of, in Legends, the Knights of the Old Republic game. There's a bit where there's this character named Bastila, one of the main characters in the game. She gets kidnapped by the big bad of the game, Darth Malak, and he's torturing her, and she thinks, like, oh, you're gonna torture me? I'm not gonna tell you anything. And he's like, I'm not torturing you to get information. I'm torturing you so that you'll crave the very thing you're being tortured with. This idea that the dark side breaks you so much that you want power, you crave the power to escape, but the knowledge that that dark side could be within you, and this thing that is hurting you could actually come from you and save you. The torture conversions to the dark side, it sounds a little bit dangerous to say I find them interesting, but it's something very psychological, and it's, the dark side is so very dark, is so very psychological, and I think that's when dark side stories are at their strongest, because so often you can have the brute strength, I'm just gonna fight a bunch of people, and force choke, and lightning, and blah, but that's the exciting part of the dark side, but so much of the dark side is here, and that's really what makes Palpatine so powerful. It's what makes Dooku so powerful. Even Vader is able to use that to a degree, and that this is something that really encompasses that. But there's another really cool writing thing that happens here, is Voss is thinking about his fear, and he wants to turn his fear to anger, to hate, to strength. And immediately, if you are somebody who has much of the Star Wars movies committed to memory, you're thinking of that Yoda line, and you're thinking of, that's not how the quote ends. And then we go to Dooku, and Dooku uses Yoda's correct line, but alters it. The idea that it's fear is the path to the dark side, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. But what Dooku is saying is that you pass through that suffering, you overcome that suffering, that yes, you will suffer, but in coming through that suffering, that's where you kind of just transcend into the dark side and become what you're supposed to become, and that ties into this torture dark side kind of thing. And so again, anytime something involves Yoda, I get excited, especially because Dooku is Yoda's direct Padawan in current canon. And the idea that he would take something his master said and still utilize it in his life, but pollute it like that is poetic, I guess. Maybe that's not even the right word, but it feels appropriate. That in a way, even though Dooku is using this as a training thing and as something that he finds as a truth to use the dark side, it's also a way in which he's haunted by the light of his master. That he's to teach students, he is still taking the teachings he was taught by a light side master, but he has to turned them into a dark side version, that he can't even really escape that light that was put into him from the beginning, and that so much of being a Sith Lord, and so much, especially if you're a Sith that came from a Jedi heritage or Jedi background, that so much of that is trying to extinguish that light within you. And even if you ultimately always stay in the dark and you ultimately are never redeemed, you're kind of, you always feel it again, you know, that pull to the light, and it never leaves you. So there's just this chapter 22, even though it's horrible and horrifying, it has some of my favorite moments that have been in the book so far, because it's these tiny little things that tie into the bigger picture, and it's a point where Golden's writing really comes out. You know, this is no shade on that. I don't want to say, like, it's not like the rest of the book hasn't been good, or it's that, you know, the scripts would have been one way or another, but this is a point where it doesn't feel like this is an exciting adaptation of something that was made for screen, which is what most of the book feels like, which is not a bad thing. It's what the book is. It's done exceptionally well, and as I read this book, I feel like I'm watching the Clone Wars, and the novel's incredibly successful in that way. This has just been one of the passages in the book, maybe the snake vision on Dathomir is another one, where it felt like this is a scene that was brought to life in text in a way that it never could have been on screen. Where most of the book is, okay, this is something that was meant for screen, how can we put it into a book so fans can still enjoy it? This is some part of the story that's really taking advantage of the medium it's in. It kind of stops being that second life for a TV show and starts really feeling like a book. And it was a part that really made me excited to read. But that's not even what the whole chapter was. Then we go to the other part of the chapter, which is Obi-Wan and the Jedi Council. Desh, Quinlan's buddy, is following Obi-Wan, trying to get information. Obi-Wan can't share information with him. We just see how much of this is plaguing Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan goes to the council after another missed meeting and fears that Voss might be dead or turned. Obi-Wan finds himself in the unique position of, like, defending Ventress. And we have a very Mace Windu line here of just, is it possible to be a former Sith? I'm a big fan of Mace Windu, so I don't really like to say things that are against Mace, because I feel like he gets too much grief, and a lot of undue grief. But this is kind of a cornerstone line of what a lot of Mace's problem is. And that's this idea of, can you be a former Sith? Well, sure, you can be a former Sith in the same way you can be a former Jedi, but that doesn't mean you lose your Sith ways, right? Sith is an order, Sith is a title, Sith is being a part of a club. You can be kicked out of the club, the dark side might still consume you, you're not technically a Sith anymore. And that doesn't mean you're gonna get along with other Sith. He still sees it as just, you shouldn't necessarily trust Ventress. But Obi-Wan is there, he's trying to oddly defend her. If you've ever kind of found yourself in that situation where there's like that person from work that you don't really like that much, but you know they're kind of getting the short end of the stick, and you're like, man, I really don't want to defend this person because they keep eating my lunch out of the break room fridge, but like, they don't deserve this, and you're just kind of in that conflict. I feel like this is a big scale version that Obi-Wan's going through right now. We go to Ventress, who has gone to other bounty hunters. She goes to Boba Fett and his friends for help. Boba doesn't trust her, but she offers enough money that the bounty hunters are kind of willing to be in on it. Boba threatens her not to double-cross her. I like that he does a pistol twirl, which is supposed to be like what Jango does in Attack of the Clones. And then we're going to kind of get some unlikely alliances here. So now we're going to get some bounty hunter stuff, and eventually some more kind of crazy alliances going forward. But that's really what I have to say about the chapters this week. I was really excited with some of the stuff we got. For next week, we're going to read 3 chapters again. So chapters 23, 24, and 25. 23, 24, and 25. If you're not already, please follow us on the various socials. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about the reading so far. But with that, I'll call the video here, and I'll talk to you guys next week.